ผมขออนุญาตนะครับเรียนเชิญผู้ช่วยศาสตราจารย์ดร.ภัทรพรผลิตตากุลนะครับรองคณบดีฝ่ายวิชาการของคณะดุริยางคศาสตร์นะครับมหาวิทยาลัยศิลปากรขึ้นมากล่าวเปิดงานนะครับเป็นเกียรติในวันนี้นะครับขออนุญาตเชิญอาจารย์ครับ
เรียนท่านคณบดีวิทยากรศิลปินและแขกผู้มีเกียรติทุกท่านในนามตัวแทนคณบดีคณะดุริยางคศาสตร์มหาวิทยาลัยศิลปากรขอร่วมยินดีต้อนรับทุกท่านสู่งาน BANGKOK SYMPOSIUM The Listening Biennial 2023 คณะดุริยางคศาสตร์ในฐานะคณะวิชาซึ่งขับเคลื่อนการเรียนการสอนที่เกี่ยวข้องกับการใช้เสียงรู้สึกยินดีและขอบคุณคณะจิตรกรรมประติมากรรมและภาพพิมพ์ที่ชักชวนมาร่วมกิจกรรมในครั้งนี้เพราะว่าเป็นกิจกรรมที่ดียิ่งในการสร้างสรรค์และแลกเปลี่ยนองค์ความรู้ภายใต้กรอบความคิดทางศิลปะและวิจัยซึ่งเน้นการใช้เสียงและการฟังค่ะอย่างที่ทุกท่านทราบนะคะว่าเสียงเนี่ยเป็นเครื่องมือที่ใช้บอกเล่าความสัมพันธ์ระหว่างมนุษย์ถ่ายทอดความทรงจำแล้วก็สะท้อนเรื่องราวชีวิตสังคมประวัติศาสตร์ความเชื่อเทคโนโลยีแล้วก็ปัจจัยต่างๆอีกมากมายเสียงสร้างแรงบันดาลใจมหาศาลนำไปสู่การสำรวจศึกษาโลกใบนี้ในแง่มุมที่แตกต่างกว้างขวางและลึกซึ้งไปมากกว่าภาพที่เรามองเห็นด้วยตา The Listening Biennial เป็นเวทีที่น่าสนใจในการรวบรวมศิลปินนักดนตรีและนักวิจัยผู้ตั้งคำถามเพื่อขับเคลื่อนการทำงานผ่านประสบการณ์จากการฟังในฐานะสื่อกลางสากลนำเสนอผลงานที่อาศัยการสั่งงานและแสดงผลด้วยเสียงผลงานเชิงทดลองและกิจกรรมเชิงวิชาการและการอบรมเชิงปฏิบัติการโดยความร่วมมือกับสถาบันและหน่วยงานต่างๆมากมายในระดับนานาชาติทั้งนี้นะคะต้องขอขอบคุณวิทยากรทั้งชาวไทยและชาวต่างประเทศและแขกผู้มีเกียรติทุกท่านที่ให้ความสนใจและเข้าร่วมฟังร่วมชมร่วมแสดงความคิดเห็นในเวทีกิจกรรมครั้งนี้ค่ะแล้วก็หวังเป็นอย่างยิ่งว่า BANGKOK SYMPOSIUM The Listening Biennial 2023 จะประสบความสำเร็จตามที่คาดหวังทุกประการค่ะสวัสดีค่ะ
ขอบพระคุณอาจารย์ภัทรกรมากนะครับขอบพระคุณมากครับขออนุญาตนะครับวันนี้บรรยากาศคงสบายๆนะครับผมขออนุญาตขอบพระคุณท่านผู้ช่วยศาสตราจารย์ดร.ภัทรพรผลิตตากุลนะครับรองคณบดีฝ่ายวิชาการคณะดุริยางคศาสตร์มหาวิทยาลัยศิลปากรนะครับแล้วขออนุญาตแนะนำตัวนะครับผมผู้ช่วยศาสตราจารย์ดร.วิชยะมุกดามณีนะครับจริงๆทำหน้าที่เป็นคณบดีของคณะจิตรกรรมประติมากรรมและภาพพิมพ์ด้วยนะครับมหาวิทยาลัยศิลปากรแล้วก็เป็นผู้ร่วมจัดงานในวันนี้ด้วยนะครับวันนี้เนื่องจากเรามีแขกผู้มีเกียรติเยอะมากผมขออนุญาตกล่าวอะไรสักเล็กน้อยนะครับเพื่อเป็นจุดเริ่มต้นของวันนี้นะครับเรียนท่านรองคณบดีนะครับวิทยากรนะครับศิลปินแล้วก็แขกผู้มีเกียรติทุกท่านนะครับก่อนอื่นต้องขอบคุณนะครับAssociate Professor Dayang นะครับจาก University of the Philippines Diliman นะครับซึ่งเป็นคิวเรเตอร์ในการจัดงานListening Biennial ปี 2023 นะครับแล้วก็เป็นผู้ที่ชักชวนคณะจิตรกรรมประติมากรรมและภาพพิมพ์ให้เข้ามามีส่วนร่วมในการจัด Listening Biennial ในปีนี้นะครับและต้องขอบพระคุณคณะดุริยางคศาสตร์มหาวิทยาลัยศิลปากรมากๆนะครับที่เมื่อผมเรียนเชิญไปว่าปรึกษาว่าอยากจะร่วมงานกันในการจัดครั้งนี้ท่านก็ทางท่านคณบดีนะครับท่านอาจารย์พุทธิชัยก็ตอบรับแล้วก็เราก็เลยล่วงเลยมาจนถึงวันนี้ที่มีการจัดงานในวันนี้ขึ้นมานะครับคณะจิตรกรรมนะครับรู้สึกยินดีและเป็นเกียรติอย่างยิ่งนะครับเราตอบรับการจัดBANGKOK SYMPOSIUM ครั้งนี้นะครับด้วยประโยชน์หลายอย่างนะครับประโยชน์เรื่องแรกคือการส่งเสริมการแสดงออกของศิลปะเสียงครับต้องยอมรับนะครับว่าปัจจุบันศิลปะเสียงยังไม่เป็นที่แพร่หลายมากนักนะครับในวงการศิลปะของประเทศไทยทั้งที่ความเป็นจริงแล้วในประเทศไทยมีศิลปินมีนักวิจัยมีนักวิชาการที่ทำงานด้านศิลปะเสียงอยู่เยอะมากนะครับแล้วผลงานก็ถูกเผยแพร่อย่างน่าสนใจอย่างต่อเนื่องนะครับทั้งในแวดวงวิชาการและแวดวงการศึกษาแวดวงศิลปะนะครับอีกเหตุผลหนึ่งนะครับคือโครงการนี้เพื่อแสดงออกถึงความร่วมมือนะครับในการพัฒนาการสร้างสรรค์และเผยแพร่ศิลปะเสียงร่วมกับเครือข่ายนานาชาตินะครับกิจกรรมในวันนี้นะครับเราได้รับเกียรติจากศิลปินนักวิจัยและนักวิชาการด้านศิลปะเสียงเยอะเลยนะครับที่มาร่วมแลกเปลี่ยนในวันนี้นะครับท่านแรกนะครับผมขออนุญาตแนะนำก่อนที่จะเข้าสู่เซสชันต่อๆไปนะครับ Associate Professor Dayang มาร์กเดลิน่านะครับเนวาน่าอาจารย์และพันธรักษ์ศิลปะด้านศิลปะเสียงจากประเทศฟิลิปปินส์นะครับจาก Department of Art Theory College of Fine Arts University of the Philippines Dillman นะครับท่านที่2นะครับคุณยังเยืองนะครับอาจารย์และพันธรักษ์ศิลปะด้านศิลปะร่วมสมัยและสื่อสมัยใหม่จากฮ่องกง Chinese University of Hong Kong นะครับท่านที่3นะครับคุณเดวิดวอร์รอฟนะครับศิลปินและพันธรักษ์ศิลปะจากแฮมเบิร์กเยอรมันนะครับท่านที่4นะครับคุณเหงียนตรินตินะครับศิลปินจากประเทศเวียดนามท่านที่5นะครับอาจารย์ดรเตยงามคุปตบุตรจากภาควิชาสื่อผสมคณะจิตรกรรมประติมากรรมและภาพพิมพ์มหาวิทยาลัยศิลปากรท่านที่6นะครับอาจารย์ภูมิพักจารุประกรณ์อาจารย์ประจำและผู้ช่วยคณบดีฝ่ายวิจัยคณะดุริยางคศาสตร์มหาวิทยาลัยศิลปากรท่านที่7นะครับอาจารย์สรยุทธเอี่ยมเอื้อยุทธจากภาควิชาสื่อศิลปะและการออกแบบสื่อคณะวิจิตรศิลป์มหาวิทยาลัยเชียงใหม่และท่านที่8อาจารย์สรัญรัตน์แสงชัยจากสาขาดนตรีเชิงพาณิชย์คณะดุริยางคศาสตร์มหาวิทยาลัยศิลปากรนะครับโดยท่านสามารถติดตามกำหนดการบรรยายได้จากสื่อประชาสัมพันธ์ในงานนะครับปีนี้ครับคณะจิตรกรรมร่วมเฉลิมฉลอง80ปีของการก่อตั้งพร้อมกับการก่อตั้งของมหาวิทยาลัยศิลปากรผมหวังเป็นอย่างยิ่งนะครับว่ากิจกรรมในวันนี้จะเป็นการส่งสัญญาณถึงแนวทางในการพัฒนาต่อไปของคณะจิตรกรรมสู่การสร้างสรรค์ที่เปิดกว้างมีความหลากหลายและดำเนินการภายใต้ความร่วมมือกับสถาบันและหน่วยงานต่างๆทั้งระดับชาติและนานาชาติครับในโอกาสนี้ผมขออนุญาตขอบพระคุณวิทยากรทั้งชาวไทยและชาวต่างประเทศอีกครั้งนะครับรวมถึงแขกผู้มีเกียรติทุกท่านที่เข้ามาร่วมในกิจกรรมวันนี้ขอให้ท่านได้รับประโยชน์จากกิจกรรมในวันนี้ไม่มากก็น้อยนะครับสุดท้ายขอยินดีต้อนรับทุกท่านเข้าสู่มหาวิทยาลัยศิลปากรครับขอเสียงปรบมือให้กับศิลปินวิทยากรอีกสักครั้งนะครับเดี๋ยวเราคงจะเริ่มกำหนดการในวันนี้เลยนะครับอันดับแรกนะครับผมขออนุญาตเรียนเชิญ Associate Professor Dayang Magdalena Nirvana นะครับพันธรักษ์ของนิทรรศการ Listening Biennial นะครับเพื่อขึ้นมาเป็นสปีกเกอร์ท่านแรกนะครับในหัวข้อ Listening Biennial 2023 นะครับ Curatorial Program ก่อนอื่นผมขออนุญาตแนะนำขอเรียกสั้นๆว่าคุณดายังนะครับสั้นๆนะครับคุณดายังนะครับรองศาสตราจารย์ต้องเป็นภาษาอังกฤษเนาะเป็น Associate Professor นะครับแต่ท่านเป็นรองศาสตราจารย์ประจำภาควิชาทฤษฎีนะครับทฤษฎีศิลปะ College of Fine Arts University of the Philippines Dillman นะครับเป็นพันธรักษ์ประจำหอศิลป์ของ University of the Philippines คุณดายังนะครับร่วมผลักดันงานวิจัยทางด้านวิชาการและการศึกษาศิลปะเสียงในประเทศฟิลิปปินส์ผลงานทางด้านวิชาการของอาจารย์ดายังนะครับประกอบไปด้วย Centennial Professorial Chair Award นะครับ PhD Incentives Award ในปี 2023 One UP Professional Chair Award for Art History and Curatorialship ปี 2023 คุณดายังเป็นพันธรักษ์และผู้ก่อตั้งโครงการศิลปะโปรเจกต์โกลโคซึ่งดำเนินการตั้งแต่ปี 2011 ถึง 2015 นะครับและ Composite Noise Series ตั้งแต่ปี 2015 ถึง 2024 อาจารย์ดายังเป็นพันธรักษ์เป็นคิวเรเตอร์นะครับแล้วก็ยังเป็นศิลปินด้วยนะครับในมุมมองของผมอาจารย์ดายังก็เป็นศิลปินด้วยแล้วก็ทำงานโดยเฉพาะด้านศิลปะเสียงศิลปะในเรื่องสื่อนะครับทำงานศิลปะในระดับนานาชาติมีเครือข่ายมากมายเลยทั้งในระดับอาเซียนในระดับเอเชียนะครับก็วันนี้ได้รับเกียรติจากอาจารย์ดายังมากขออนุญาตมอบไปอาจารย์ดายังครับ
Good morning, everybody. My assignment for today is quite straightforward. I am to report the proceedings of the Listening Biennial, like how is it planned and what is going to happen. So the Listening Biennial is an artistic research initiative focusing on listening as a relational capacity, a philosophical and political proposition, a creative practice, and research framework. Acts as an umbrella bringing together practitioners, researchers, institutions, and collectives engaged in listening as a method, a tool, a poetics, from radical empathy to weak ontology, poetic refusal to diasporic resistance, eavesdropping, to intimate envelopment, listening wields a creative and critical force that may contribute to maintaining the diversity of our social adventure. So this is the official description of the Listening Biennial that is published. It is essentially coming together with listening at its core. The first edition was held at the thick of the pandemic in 2021, July, also the same time, July to August, curated by Yeung, Isabel Martinez, Budaditya Chattopadhyay, and Brandon Labelle. Sorry about that, Woods. These are the artists invited, including our very own Acharan Wantani, who is a faculty of the Fine Arts. And it happened in 18 cities simultaneously. The second edition was officially announced as the Listening Biennial, being envisaged as an ecology of attention, one shaped by a critical concern for challenging existing constructs of exclusion and extraction, and that invites a shift from paying to giving attention. Such giving is emphasized as profoundly dynamic, that moves across a range of sites and scenes, and whose movement incites and seed form of recognition and cooperation, collective joy and contestation. This includes what we might term poetic sensing, where methods of engagement are enhanced by power of the imagination. So these are the curators. We have Luisa Santos from Portugal, Gili Morato from Bolivia, myself from the Philippines, and Raya Badrian from Lebanon. And these are the artist selection for the audio exhibition that is distributed within the network of participating organization, institution, and spaces. There are 30 of them. And this is currently happening in 21 cities since July 6 until August 8. Okay. As a curatorial exercise, among the issues considered were: one, how listening play a part in our work as curators, as artists, and as academics. We also considered the local perspective or investigations that formed our approach. Three, issues of voice and questioning of how we speak. It is something that we also ask ourselves. Brandon proposes that maybe in nurturing an ecology of attention, we can support the emergence of a new culture of listening as well as storying or storytelling. So it was formally articulated on the website that the biennial curatorial direction are the range of localized themes and concerns, such as the many diverse responses to these many questions. From that line of conversation, I went back to planning the Asia event for the second edition. The COVID-19 pandemic, although a global phenomenon, was experienced by people locally and differently in different locations. And while it is primarily a medical crisis, it inevitably became a social and cultural crisis. Anxiety and uncertainty remains high in Asian region up to now. No? We can feel it. Since emerging from the pandemic is received by a very apparent economic decline. Bringing the Listening Biennial in this region means it will be subjected to participate in this line of conversation. The Listening Biennial that is programmed for Asia subscribes to the understanding that listening is a political act that enables a community to move forward in their collective agenda. Community is one of the keywords in our region. Prior to the pandemic, I had been working with a network of artists in Southeast Asia and Japan in numerous capacities. We have Project Local, Media Art Kitchen, Composite Noises, and other similar projects. Research accompanying these projects, I saw that Southeast Asia and some cities in East Asia do not have a network of scenes, but instead a community of practice. It is a kind of association where trust and camaraderie are as much currency as resources, talent, or skills in creating art. It is a barangay, a kampung, a muban, or a village where one lives and not simply where one does his tasks. In my research, I propose that this community of practice have porous borders that allows participants to go in and out of the community without formal restrictions. It has nodal junctures, which means that the community itself is expandable, and that it has mobile core, where the center of activities of the community decisions or the movement of the community is not determined by only one core. There is no central authority in our lives. Each community in each city in Southeast Asia naturally has their own local configuration of these characteristics, but understanding these communities to have these characteristics helps one understand that the tamaro of the ecology is connection. Connection is the other keyword. Connection is a relationship that is nurtured and nourished by shared participation. This may not always entirely be about art. It could simply be just coming together in a party or hanging out or commenting on each other's posts on Facebook, among others. This is perhaps one of the most important elements of Southeast Asia community of practice. Prior to the pandemic, with the prevalence of cheap air travel, backpackers in and popularity of residencies, particularly those organized by artists, and festival-like with international participation, the connection extended beyond cities of each country and onto cities of whichever country is in the region. This was made obvious with the introduction of artists via the cities they represent rather than the countries they belong to. Say, for example, you say Arnon, I am a curator from Manila. Arnon is an artist from Chiang Mai. Ajar Nguyen is an artist from Bangkok, no? And also by the organization they belong to, like Trinity of, sorry, I lost the name, okay, yeah, and then Tengal of Wasak or Piwi of Green Papaya and all these things. The scope, but this means that the scope of my past work allows me to include cities also that are not geographically Southeast Asia but had the same relationship. So we call them conveniently Southeast Asia. We are always in contact with Hong Kong, Japan, and Taipei. In the Biennale, the conceptual framework I propose is that we explore listening as a discursive act of coming together in moving forward from the ashes of the pandemic and the ills that it brought upon humanity. But where is forward? And how can listening do what it is assigned to do? So to find out, I further propose asking two more questions. One, what is it that we hear that we would listen to? And two, what is it that we do not hear that we should listen to? In trying to answer both questions, we will be confronted by where we were and where we want to go. Literally, the biennial that is currently running can be found in these spaces that you see on the slides, although predominantly it was programmed to happen within university campuses. It is spread out in different colleges and different locations. Similar, this is for the Philippines, this is for Manila, so the main station is my college, the UP Fine Arts Gallery, but we also did a collaborative endeavor with the College of Mass Communication, Alitaptap Artist Village, which is south of Manila, and the University Hotel. So these are the activities, the slides that follow. I'll show you the activities that were lined up for the biennial. We have the listening session or tambayan. Tambayan in Filipino term is to hang out. The point or objective of this is for people to gather. Resource persons are from different sectors, not only from the arts, who had projects related to listening, sounding, musicking, and other related acts. The listening tambayan is high flex, which means something was happening on site and another thing is happening, and we are connected online with people online. There are 6 episodes that is being aired by DZUP 1602, the official radio station of the University of the Philippines, on remote broadcast within the month. It features over 20 resource persons who share their curated playlist based on the theme. These resource persons are invited from Manila, Aurora, Sydney, Melbourne, Taipei, Portsmouth, Singapore, Sharjah, Hamburg, Bangkok, and Cyberjaya. Arjan Compact was part of the Listening Tambayan Session 3, yeah? And these are the themes that were explored in the Tambayan. So if you follow us on Facebook, either your Faculty of Fine Arts or the UP Fine Arts Gallery, you'll see when they will be broadcasted. So this was the setup at the College of Masscom auditorium. There are resource persons online and on-site. there is a moderator and and tambais or people who were hanging out, or anybody else who would want to listen and participate in the discussion. So, yeah. There is another type of tambayan, which is more the performance, live performance type. So we had World Listening Day, never-ending gig. It is a performance for 12 hours straight that happened at the University Hotel, featuring over 40 artists from different genres. Here is an example of a performance, one impromptu collaboration between Takuro Oshima, a visiting artist from Kyoto, and Sensei Hiroki Nagai, a faculty of UP College of Fine Arts, College of Music. Tambayan may also be part of exhibit programming. For example, the launch day of the biennial in Tokyo that happened on July 6 in Camões Cultural Center of Portugal in Tokyo. We launched with the performance of DJ Sniff and Makoto Nomura. In Manila by Takuro Oshima and Hiroki Nagai. This is also a combination of experimental performance, a performance by experimental artists and one by coming from the Conservatory of Music. Another two performances that happened, one by Elemento by Lirio Salvador, and a sound bath by Angeline De Jos during the opening of the exhibit in Manila. These are the samples. Sandata or weapon, which is an assemblage created by Lirio Salvador in the mid-1990s. The artist is currently incapacitated, but there is a group of people who continues to use his instrument as part of their performance and exhibition materials. And this is the performance by performances both goes on for each an hour. The exhibit openings are more like it runs like half a day. We start at 11 a.m. and runs until 5 p.m. All right. So as for the second component is the exhibition. As for the exhibition components, we have two. Specifically in Manila, we have Use Your Ear, which is the same exhibition that we have in Tokyo currently running and other parts in the other 21 countries. So this is a curated audio exhibition by the 4 curators that I earlier mentioned. These are 30 pieces of work. The other exhibit is there is no sound artist, just sound art. Is an output of my PhD incentive grant. So it's the research that I've been doing on the sound art practice in the Philippines. No, it contains installative works by 19 artists, if I'm not mistaken. So there are no sound artists. There are no sound artists, only sound art is an archival exhibit and installative sound work that have previously been exhibited. It attempts to bring to fore materials to examine how contemporary art scene in Manila caters to the sound as art medium. The title is an alteration of Gombrich's claim that there is no art, only artist. This famous art historian proposes what we call art, or the artness of art is bestowed by the object or ideas associated to the makers. This present exhibition, on the other hand, proposes, however, that in the case of sound art, that sound art or the sound artness does not necessarily only come from sound artists. The producer may or may not be a sound artist. This claim is not a paradox, but an illustration of how Manila art scene, particularly pertaining to its participation in the discourse of sound art operates. Where the sound artness of sound art in Manila comes from then, in Manila, sound art has been used as a generic, in its generic sense. It covers anyone from experimental musicians, electronic musicians, visual artists, filmmakers, media artists, performance artists who work with sound as an art medium. After a decade of research, we found out that sound as art medium might be most appropriate for the use. The exhibit is, as mentioned, an illustrative claim of my illustrative claim of finding in trying to understand what sound art is or may be in Manila through the Sonic Manila research. As this research only features installative work, we are hoping to stage another one that is more performative. Staging of this exhibit was intentionally placed at the time when the Listening Biennial is to happen so that it is included in a broader geographical conversation on the topic. I'm wrong. It's 17 artists from Manila featuring Dato Arellano, Teresa Barroso, Eric Calilan, Gerencio Iniel Cruz, Tad Ermitaño, Chris Garcimo, Jet Ilagan, Ian Carlo Haushan, Benji Miamo, Mitch Chivas, Kyle Rudis, Kian Barameda, Jamel Obnamia, Mark Rambo, Marco Ortega, and we restaged one of our works called Atang, and Lirios, the assemblage that was being played earlier was also part of the show. There are also 9 artists from Asia. The works were placed there in conversation with the exhibition, such as those from our colleagues from Multimedia University in Cyberjaya in Malaysia. Also from Takuro Oshima of Kyoto and Sho Yoshihama of Akita. So these are example works that can be found in the exhibition. That's the crew down there. Okay. So I'm gonna move anymore. Next activity is Sound Camp. This was fun. Sound Camp is a 3 days affair where participants engage in sound walk, sound composition, conversation. A camp was held in a rural setting, so we are detached from our usual environment. There were the three main activities were, one was facilitated by David, and two other Filipino artists moderated the sound walk, and then they did a composition, and finally the output of the soundscape composition was premiered in the World Listening Day. This camp participation, the camp participation was invitational only because of the task that was given. So we cannot just accept anyone because we're demanding the participants to do so much. Anyway, there were 15 participants and it was held at the Alitaptap Artist Community in Cavite, Philippines. We were hosted by, so we say this is a practice of listening as giving. But instead, the whole community gave us so much. We were fed. We were force-fed 5 meals a day, and we were like sheltered from the torrential rains. Anyway, so we read and discussed, did listening walks, did field recording, had listening sessions, then compositions and group outputs. So there's a lot of sitting down and listening, which is something of a luxury, I think, with our busy schedules on a regular day. The final component is the series of symposium where Bangkok is included. It's called Symposium Series, but the proponents also did a series of talks. Like we had workshop yesterday with the students of Silapacorn University. Same thing is happening in Malaysia Multimedia University and also in the University of the Philippines. So the series of talks by invited guests who are practitioners and or scholars whose works reflect the theme of the chosen who reflects on a chosen theme. The objective of this symposium is to present academic studies and or creative practices that expounds on listening as a political act, listening to or as connection, and listening as or to science, and listening to or as art. So as mentioned, we will have it in Manila in August 2 as part of the closing programs. We are this is happening now in Bangkok, and then we will have it next week in Malaysia. All right, so now in closing, I would like to share a video from the founder and initiator of Listening Biennial that he sent for the launch. Although he mentioned Manila, since it is the center of operation, his well wishes extends to the rest of the Asian Listening Biennale that we are celebrating right now. So I'm sharing with you Brandon LaBelle's video. Greeting.
Hello, I'm Brandon LaBelle. I'm the Artistic Director of the Listening Biennial. I'm thrilled to be able to share this greetings and word of welcome with you, and to send my deepest thanks to all my colleagues in Manila, as well as to the various institutions, venues, and collaborators across the world that are supporting the biennial. It truly is a joy to work together and to share in this collective experience of listening together, as well as engaging with various urgent topics of concern, and especially how all this can contribute to building community. This is really at the heart of the biennial as a project, to foster creative forms of recognition, mutuality, freedom, and social imagination. Not to mention to take pleasure in finding out together what listening is and can be, and especially where it might take us. From witnessing and knowing each other to dreaming of other worlds, listening is certainly deeply involved in the breath of life and the capacity to heal and repair, and importantly, to keep us close to the poetic dimensions. So, I wish you a beautiful experience and a wonderful series of events and gatherings.
Okay. So on behalf of Luisa Santos, Raya Badrian, and Gili Morato, and Dayang Yraola, thanking you all for listening.
Thank you very much, Dayang. I will sum it up in English a bit, and thank you very much for the introduction of the Listening Biennale. So we know now that the Listening Biennale is not only in Thailand, it's actually centralized this year, the second edition in Manila, and it's spread out in many countries. It's very busy schedule for Dayang and the crew. She will go to Malaysia afterward, and things happening at the same time during this month. And as you can see from the slides, that it's not just only the talk, but also exhibition and also tambayan. That's some word that I learned from meeting with Dayang. And it's very interesting platform. They invite people to gather around the sound and discuss from the sound. So the listening Biennale is not about music, it's not about sound, it's about listening. And it's experiencing, and also one keyword that I think it will be something that keep repeating throughout this event is the community. So throughout the talk today, that you will see that it's just not only the title of the speaker that they speak about something, but it's also capturing through the keyword of memories, science, technology, art, social engagement, and community. So I really hope that through the introduction of Dayang and also the rest of the speakers, you will learn so many things and experience so many things through the listening. And the next speaker that will give the talk today, just a moment. Oh, by the way, ท่านที่ยังไม่ได้รับหูฟังนะครับเนื่องจากว่าในเซสชันตอนเช้านะครับเรามีการแปลแบบเรียลไทม์นะครับ spontaneous นะครับท่านสามารถจะเอาบัตรประชาชนนะครับไปแลกหูฟังนะครับสำหรับเซสชันตอนเช้าจะแปลจากภาษาอังกฤษเป็นภาษาไทยนะครับแต่ในส่วนเซสชันตอนบ่ายจะเป็นภาษาไทยนะครับก็จะเหมาะกับผู้ฟังในประเทศไทยมากกว่านะครับแต่ว่าตอนเช้าท่านสามารถจะเอาหูฟังมาได้เลยนะครับอยู่ทางด้านหลังนะครับขออนุญาตเข้าสู่เบรกที่2นะครับ so it's 10:15 now and I would like to start our second session and it's our honor to have this artist. He flew. I asked him. He just arrived yesterday, 2 days ago, 22 hours, directly imported from Hanover, from Germany. He flew very far away to join us and to give us this experience. Please give applause to Mr. David Wallraf, please. คุณเดวิดนะครับเดินทางมาจากเยอรมันเลยนะครับเพื่อมาทอล์กกับเราในวันนี้นะครับแล้วก็ he will give a talk on the topic of listening as art and science noise as sonic experience ผมขออนุญาตกล่าวถึง I would like to introduce David a little bit briefly. So David Wallraf is a noise artist. He describes himself as a noise artist and theorist living in Hamburg, Germany. In his artistic work, he delves into the uncanny and the disturbing sonic residues of quotidian life, crafting more or less musical noisescapes that function like soundtracks for interesting nightmares. I really like this phrase. It's really gives me a lot of things to think about what is your work going to be like. His work have been released by numerous international tape labels. A recent interest has been live scoring of surrealist silent films. In academia, he holds a bachelor degree in musicology, an MFA in time-based media, and a doctorate degree in philosophy, both at Hamburg Hochschule, at Hamburg.
Kunsthochschule, Art School.
Art School in Hamburg. His PhD thesis, noise, is in, but maybe...
Right, my dissertation, my book, German title, Grenzen des Hörens, Noise und die Akustik des Politischen, which translates as Limits of Hearing, Noise and the Acoustics of the Political.
Limit of hearing, and that's a very interesting topic for the PhD and for the work and as well. And well, I think yesterday David had the workshop with our students in Nakhon Pathom, and I learned a lot from his presentation, and I think the students learned a lot from his presentation as well. And so the stage is yours. Thank you very much for joining us. please give him applause again ขอเสียงปรบมือให้คุณเดวิดด้วยครับ
Thanks for being here. Thanks for having me. This talk will take about 40 minutes of your time. I hope it will be entertaining and informative. It will run into the problem of translation by default. So I'm very interested how this all will work out for you guys. Little disclaimer, I touch on some political topics in my talk, and they are strictly from a European perspective. I hope that some connections can be made to your situation, but yeah, that's up to you. So let's get started. Since a couple of decades, noise has lurked around the fringes of sound studies, slowly but steadily carving out a niche for something that could be called noise theory. Except for a couple of precursors like Jacques Attali and Michel Serres in the 1970s, noise has only started to be theorized as a sonic experience since the anti-musical genre of the same name has developed in the 1980s and 1990s. With a little delay, Paul Haggerty's Noise/Music from 2007 was one of the first academic publications to deal with the entangled mess of concepts, aesthetics, and acoustics that both surround and emerge from noise. In recent years, noise theory has notably shifted from questions of a sonic to more philosophical and/or political implications. Cecile Malaspina's An Alchemistology of Noise from 2018 and Martin's Social Dissonance from 2022 are relevant examples of this, and I'm deeply indebted to these two authors, and they're really worth checking out. So, in this presentation, I want to refocus on the sonic aspects of noise without sacrificing the valuable work that has been done on it as a philosophical and political concept. And it will be inevitable to tackle the broader implications of noise to address the sonic phenomenon. Because noise has a tendency to complicate itself, as I'm hoping to show you. But first, I'll give you an overview of the semantic and conceptual field that noise unfolds. And then I'll carry on with two exemplary cases of noise in practice. One from the aesthetic field of noise as music, and the other from the political spectrum. So here we have sort of a etymological semantic tree of the word noise itself. The sonic in general, and more specifically noise, open a complex field of metaphors that make them both describable and ambiguous at the same time. The word noise itself derives from Old French, where it means conflict or strife, and it remains unclear if its origin lies in the Latin nausea, or seasickness, or noxia, which means wound or damage. Today it carries ambiguous and multiple meanings, analog to other European languages like the French oui, the Spanish ruido, or the Italian rumori. I want to focus on the conceptual ambiguities of noise and the political implications of the sonic experience that arise from this. In my first language, German, the translation of noise divides into 4 words that conveniently correspond to distinct fields of meaning. Rauschen, as in white or stochastic noise, Lärm, as in loud or annoying sound, Geräusch, as in unmusical or insignificant sound, and Störung, which can mean both annoyance and disruption of a signal. So we get lots of Umlaute. If any of you like 80s metal, you get your share of Umlaute. Translating noise to German allows for a simple yet effective deconstructive trick. Translate a word with complex meaning into another language, follow a few etymological and epistemic traits, and examine the conceptual differences and relations that emerge from this procedure. I want to show that these distinct definitions influence each other when the word noise is commonly used, and that they create a zone of ambiguity that is noisy in itself. So, first stop, Lärm. Lärm is translatable as loud or annoying sound. The word derives from the Italian allarme, which is the call to arms. The word alarm also comes from that. As loudness, it is physically measurable and quantifiable. For example, any exposure to a sound louder than 120 decibels might be the last thing that you or anybody will ever hear in their lives. Interestingly, silence on the decibel scale doesn't signify the absence of sound. 0 decibels means that sound levels are so low that they are masked by the noise that our own nervous system produces. For a hearing being, there can be no absolute silence. Loud sound, of course, is objectively detrimental, but it can be nonetheless mobilizing and enjoyable. Just think rave, think concert, whatever. As annoying sound, it is an aesthetic and social judgment. Noise is the sound produced by the others, their bad taste in music heard through apartment walls when you're trying to sleep. But loud sound also has a political ring to it. This shows in noise abatement regulations and in socio-economic territorialization, like who gets to live in the noisy part of town, who lives in a quiet gated community, which social groups are deemed to be noisy, and under which circumstances loudness is perceived as the sonic marker of power and authority rather than as an annoyance. So, Geräusch or noise can also be, in short, any sound that is neither musical nor meaningful. The definition of noise sound as the opposite of music sound dates to German physicist Hermann von Helmholtz's work from the 19th century, but is still used to this day. According to his Sensations of Tone from 1863, a musical sound has a periodic waveform. A sine wave is a good example for this. A perfectly symmetrical waveform, a single pitch without any timbre or overtones. A sine wave there on the right, and sine wave as a sonic experience. Something like this. sine waves do not occur in nature. They can only be produced technically. And the opposite of a sine wave would be white noise, a perfectly random and thus aperiodic waveform. White noise. Just for a second before it sends anybody to sleep. So these are like abstract functions, sine waves and white noise. We don't meet them in our everyday lives. They have to be generated electronically. And they are polar opposites of the sonic. But in practice, the separation of both of them is not easily accomplished. All musical sound produced by physical instruments lies somewhere between these two abstract poles. In a semantic system like human language that is basically built from noises, true noise would be any sound that escapes a system of signification. Coughing is no part of language, but it can be very signifying if strategically placed. So a true escape from significance is hard to achieve. Who is producing noise and who produces meaningful sound is a question that occupied philosophy from its very beginnings. For example, the theory of phone and logos in Aristotle's Politics. Here, back in ancient Greece, only the male citizens of Athenian polis were in possession of logos, that is, language, truth, and meaning. Everybody else, women, children, slaves, non-Greeks, the so-called barbarians, only had a voice or phone, but no meaningful language. To the Greeks, they produced noises when they opened their mouths. This ancient elitism is still active in contemporary racist stereotypes of language, dialects, and accents. Outside of language and music, we are of course surrounded by noises from various sources all the time, be it from cars, animals, wind, or whatever. The components of soundscapes that surround us. The distinction of pleasant sound and unpleasant noise is a more or less unconscious value judgment that we perform constantly. Rauschen, another translation of noise, shares its etymology with Geräusch, but designates a specific form of sound like white noise, pink noise, etc. It touches on the thermodynamic concept of entropy, Brownian movement, electronic engineering, information theory, and cybernetics. Rauschen is onomatopoetically close to its source, the of the sea or the wind in the trees. It can be also used as a verb that has its English equivalent in to swoosh or to whoosh. It must be noted that ideal white noise is a more mathematical abstraction than an empirical sonic event. I was ahead of myself, I already mentioned it. White noise is defined as all audible frequencies at equal amplitude. But the human ear is not able to perceive this, since our hearing emphasizes frequencies around 4 kilohertz that are crucial for speech discrimination. On the microscopic level, we are always surrounded by the emanations of what is called Brownian molecular movement or Brownian noise, named after its discoverer, the 19th century botanist Robert Brown. The constant random fluctuation of particles. All matter is noisy. In complete silence, there is noise or Rauschen to be found. Slide. So noise can also be translated as Störung, which means disturbance, interference, malfunction, or nuisance. This is the principal meaning of noise in Claude Shannon's mathematical theory of communication, and it is the definition farthest removed from any acoustic connotations. The role of noise in this model of communication shown here is worth to be discussed in detail. Shannon's theory emerged during World War II and was first published in 1948. Its main concern is the effectiveness of communication in a technological setting. In his days, mainly telephony, radio, and telegraphy. In short, the information source has some message it wants to communicate. The message gets coded in a transmittable way and is broadcasted via a transmitter through a channel of communication that is affected by a noise source that changes the signal, then gets collected by a receiver to finally get decoded by the message's destination. In a situation like this here, it would work the following way. Me, the source, has an information it wants to share, like this talk now. I use a specific code, the English language, and transmit the message as a signal speech through a communication channel, this microphone, PA system, the air in this room, to your ears as receivers, and your brains decode it. And of course, there's a noise source, inevitably. Noise cannot be escaped in this theory, and it would be anything happening in this room now sonically that makes you miss my point or misunderstand what I'm trying to communicate to you all. Information theory is not concerned with the meaning or semantics of messages at all, and I quote from the mathematical theory of communication. In particular, information must not be confused with meaning. In fact, two messages, one of which is heavily loaded with meaning and the other of which is pure nonsense, can be exactly equivalent from the present viewpoint as regards information. It is this, undoubtedly, that Shannon means when he says that semantic aspects of communication are irrelevant to the engineering aspects. In order to make information quantifiable and computable, Shannon employed the binary code of Boolean logic. The amount of information is defined in the simplest case to be measured by the logarithm of the number of available choices, which is a bit, the binary choice between two possible states, 0 and 1. If one bit is transmitted, that's the minimum of information that can be received. There's a bit of a twist in information theory. Shannon called the measure for a maximum of information entropy. Entropy is a term borrowed from thermodynamics, where it denotes a state of a system in which all energy is equally distributed and no directed flow of energy is possible. Such a system is unorganized or perfectly shuffled. When all possible states of a system are equally likely, a maximum of information equals no information at all. Everything is ambiguous if freedom of choice is total. According to the second law of thermodynamics, this is the eventual fate of any system, our bodies, the universe, etc. When no directed flow of energy is possible because everything is equally distributed, the system dies. But what does this have to do with information? Information is at a maximum when all elements of a code are equally distributed, like in a perfectly random sequence of letters. The possibilities of combination are maxed out to the limit. But of course, there's no usable information in an entropic state. It's like an indistinguishable wall of noise. So information always has to navigate between its entropic maximum and its redundant minimum to transport actually useful or wanted information. Redundancy in this model means like I could noise for 40 minutes straight and it would be pretty sure that you got what I meant, but you only got one single thing because you had nothing to choose from. So information always navigates between redundancy as the minimum and entropy as the maximum. Cecile Malaspina writes in her book An Epistemology of Noise, quote, Shannon's concept of information entropy and hence also of noise is devoid of any ontological reference. It could inform us about the probability of occurrence of any phenomenon involving large numbers, be it in the flow of signals, flows of people, of goods, or unicorns. In short, it is ontologically arbitrary. It can be transferred to literally anything that can be viewed as communication. So these four definitions of noise tend to crosstalk with each other. They intermingle and engage in relations that are mediated by metaphors and analogies. For example, entropy is used as an analogy in information theory itself. Because the theory is concerned with electronic communication, white noise is the perfect metaphor for its own understanding of noise. Entropy as the eventual heat death of the universe would probably sound like noise.
ถ้าเป็นเสียงของไอตอนที่จักรวาลเราสิ้นสลายเนี่ยเสียงมันก็คงจะเป็นเสียงเหมือน white noise คือเป็นเสียงที่ไม่มีความแน่นอนคาดเดาไม่ได้เป็นสัญญาณที่เรารับฟังข้อมูลเนื้อหาความหมายจากมันไม่ได้เลยซึ่งความกำกวมตรงนี้เนี่ยที่มันมีอยู่ในตัวของเสียงในของข้อมูลมันอยู่แล้วตัวทฤษฎีข้อมูล information theory ก็บอกว่าข้อมูลที่เราอยากได้ที่เราดึงมาจากเสียงเหล่านี้ได้เนี่ยมันก็อยู่ในตัวของคำว่าเสียงที่เราใช้เรียกมันว่ามันเป็นเสียงประเภทไหนว่าพอเราเจอเสียงนี้เราใช้คำว่าอะไร
And to complicate matters a bit further, noise is also the name of a musical genre that puts the system of classification that is genre itself into question. I have a quote here from British philosopher Ray Brassier concerning noise as a genre. Quote, noise not only designates the no man's land between electroacoustic investigation, free improvisation, avant-garde experiment and sound art. More interestingly, it refers to anomalous zones of interference between genres, between post-punk and free jazz, between musique concrète and folk, between stochastic composition and art brut. excuse me. Yet, in being used to categorize all forms of sonic experimentation that ostensibly defy musicological classification, be they paramusical, anti-musical, or post-musical, noise has become a generic label for anything deemed to subvert established genre. So it would be fair to say that noise, as musical practice, is the end of music. Or, to be more specific, the end of a certain discourse on music, a way to talk about, define, or classify music. Needless to say, this end of music has been transgressing itself for over 100 years now. From the art of noises of the Italian futurists to Japanese harsh noise, with stations like European avant-garde music of the 20th century, free jazz, punk, etc., noise has always found ways to fold back into musicality, become genreified, break free of definitions, and proliferate into a vast array of hybrid, sub- and meta-genres. Noise as genre has always played with or incorporated most of the aforementioned definitions of noise. It usually qualifies as loud sound. For the vast majority, it is annoying. It incorporates noise and noises instead of musical tones or rhythms. Its material is all the noises that information theory mentions: distortions, feedback, every technical malfunction that music technology has produced so far. So, as promised, I will now demonstrate the metaphorical entanglements of noise with two examples. One from the realm of aesthetics and musical genres, and one from the area of politics. Come on. Ha. Within the vast multitude of subgenres of noise that emerged during the past decades, harsh noise wall stands out as one of the possible dead ends of music. An aesthetic of a sonic that perfected a certain approach and doesn't allow any further development in that direction, thereby raising the issue of aesthetic progress in general. I have here an example by a French noise musician, Romain Perrault is his name, and the name of his project is Vomir, French word for vomiting. In person, he's a very nice guy, but his project is very dark. So, before I talk too much about his music, I give you a short sample from a 6 CD box that he released in 2007. It's called Claustration. I will give you like a 20-second sample. Just imagine that sound fills the whole 74 minutes of a CD, and that it's a 6 CD box, so that it's about 7 hours of that sound you are going to hear constantly. I think you get the impression. Should be very loud, but I think you get what I mean. So all 6 CDs contain essentially the same noise with slight variations in equalization from track to track. But this goes for his entire output, which is, I don't know, 210 tapes, CDs, singles, albums. The playing duration of different tracks only dictated by the physical media. If music ever came close to mimicking an entropic system, then it's here. This reflects in Vermeer's album titles and slogans like "No ideas, no change, no remorse." "Social distancing" is the name of one of his albums. "Here Goes Nothing" is the name of that CD. "Pro Anomie" is another one. In concerts, he often wears a black plastic bag over his head and remains motionless for the entire duration. Oh no, I hit the HDMI cable. Ah, okay. I did visual noise. Yay! And he remains motionless for the duration of the entire show. Romain Perrault has also published a manifesto of harsh noise wall, the proclamation of a bruitist wall, a few years ago. The opening sentence of this manifesto reads, "The individual no longer has an alternative but to completely refuse the promoted and preached contemporary life. The only still free behavior is noise and withdrawal, to never surrender to handling, socialization, and entertainment." So the sounds he produces are like a literal wall to block out society. Vermeer's noise aims at being anti-communication. Noise as the negation of society and information, a sonic form of Hikikomori syndrome. I hope I pronounced that right, this Japanese thing of teenagers who lock themselves into their rooms and don't leave. It's a big social problem in Japan. It's supposed to be a nihilist simulacrum of total rejection of society. But, of course, writing a manifesto is a very communicative act in itself. And furthermore, the materiality of harsh noise walls somehow contradicts the claim of seclusion and entropic stupor. Especially in a loud concert situation, the noise of Vermeer allows for a sonic phenomenon that hardly any other music allows for in this radical form. Because there are no structures to latch onto, no rhythm, melody, and so on, the brain of a listener starts to impose its own structures onto the material, like discovering shapes in clouds or on a white wall. If you stare at it long enough, you can listen to your own brain listening. You can listen to listening. And the structures you can discover shift in any direction. So, in a sense, harsh noise wall is the form of music that gives the listener a maximum of liberty in how to interpret it, or a maximum of choices in the vocabulary of information theory. It opens one's ears to the random fluctuations of Brownian molecular movement or something very similar. If shared by many individuals, it becomes a backdrop for being singular plural. Everybody hears the same thing while all hear it radically differently. The asserted rejection of community and communication turns into a communal ideal. Everybody equal but different. Hydrate for a second. So, and we get to the area of politics. Short explanation of this picture. That is from 2017. In my hometown, Hamburg, we had the G20 summit, and the whole city was basically blocked off for the week of the summit with very heavy police presence, and on a Friday, riots broke out in the city, and it was on an evening where the heads of state assembled at Hamburg's biggest concert hall to listen to Beethoven's Ode to Joy. And this is from N24, a television news broadcaster that was a literal split screen. This is happening simultaneously. The heads of state in the Elbphilharmonie listening to Beethoven on the right, and on the left side the riot starting in another area of town. And these two events went parallel for a couple of hours. Sort of a relation of noise and harmony. So there's in Brandon LaBelle's book Acoustic Territories, there's a chapter on noise and riots I would like to quote from now. So LaBelle writes, "The riot, the street fight and the demonstration may be understood as dynamic instances of conflict and debate, as well as an audible interaction between riding, the dictates of law, and noise, the suspension of law. An interaction that lends to defining history. On one side, the law as a signature of written record, decree, juridical account, and on the other, a drive toward its overturning, whose momentum relies upon, is initiated or calls for the development of a separate language, one that stands in opposition or that brings the law in its own hands. Thus, riots, street fights, and demonstration produce an audibility that seeks to overturn or overwhelm the written record, the law and house rule, with a meaning determined by volume and the promise embedded in making noise. Such actions in turn instigate new patterns, aiming to reconfigure set rhythms with other timing. To break the law, then, is also to break the functioning order of a given system." End quote. So this is a somewhat romanticized notion, both of riots and of noise, but it gives a clear picture of how the acoustics of a political situation can be organized and how metaphor is used to bridge concepts. Noise as a metaphor for disorder, the written word or law for order. But reality is more complex, both on the sonic and on the conceptual level. I will use some examples from law, the empirical acoustics of riots, and technological developments to expand from LaBelle's text and give an account of what I mean with noise as a strategic metaphor. In German law, a demonstration is officially disbanded or dispersed when the police declares it to be over. This is written down in the Right of Assembly, paragraph 13. Quote, "As soon as a meeting is declared dissolved, all participants must leave immediately." End quote. What the law does not state is how this declaration is to be given. In reality, these declarations can be overheard because the police might not be equipped with adequate PA systems and announcements get drowned out. the written law fails to actualize itself due to a lack of volume, which usually does not hinder the police to start using force immediately, but that's a different story. So to deal with the situation of the law or police forces being overheard, there has been technological development. This problem of intelligibility is addressed by the LRAD, or long-range acoustic device, marketed by the company Genesis, formerly LRAD Corporation. It uses so-called hypersonic sound, that's two ultrasonic sound waves that modulate each other and allow to channel audible sound like a beam. It's also called a sonic laser, so it doesn't spread like a normal loudspeaker, but you can focus it in a, I think, 30-degree angle towards a target. The LRAD can emit sound levels up to 160 decibels, so literally deafening, and is used by police and military forces around the world. Genesis claims that its product is, that's the quote in blue there, that its product is low profile, lightweight, and easily mounted and transported to provide a highly effective long-range communication and warning capability. The LRAD 300X broadcasts clear, authoritative voice commands and attention-commanding deterrent tones to determine intent, safely modify behavior, enhance response capabilities, and scale the escalation of force if necessary. End quote. It is worth noting how closely intelligibility is related to deterrence and force, or non-lethal forms of sonic violence here. In other publications, Genesis usually emphasizes that the LRAD should not be considered a weapon, though it should be clear by the deployment of these devices during the Black Lives Matter protests in the USA in 2020 and other unrests that this is clearly not the case. In 2017, a New York City judge ruled that as a projector of powerfully amplified sound, the LRAD is no different than other tools in law enforcement's arsenal that have the potential to be used either safely or harmfully. One example being distraction devices, items like stun grenades, flashbangs, or concussion grenades. That was from a New York Times article from 2017. Of course, there are other sonic weapons used by police forces around the world that lack the nimbus of high technology of the LRAD completely. During the Gilets Jaunes protests in France in 2018 and the recent protests after the killing of Nahel Merzouk by French police, the police in the riots used so-called grenades assourdissants, flashbang grenades in large quantities to dispel crowds. The loud bangs of these sonic bombs nonetheless transmit a clear message without using words that would go like disperse, go away, surrender. So the word order not only has a double meaning, it also has a curious function in language and information theory. On one hand, it is a reduction of language, something below semantics. As Elias Canetti has pointed out in Crowds and Power, animals can understand orders. A dog understands orders without understanding language. Information theory does not concern itself with meaning, as Shannon and Weaver has assured us. the semantic aspects of communication are irrelevant from the engineering perspective. When the model of communication is applied to a political situation like a riot, it can be viewed as a system of power and force. The order has a special position in this, and in this sense, French philosophers Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari have attempted a critique of information theory. This can be shown in a quote, one from A Thousand Plateaus. Quote, "The order does not refer to prior significations or to a prior organization of distinctive units, quite the opposite. Information is only the strict minimum necessary for the emission, transmission, and observation of orders as commands. One must be just informed enough not to confuse fire with for." Deleuze also says that language is a system of instructions rather than a means of conveying information. We ought, in fact, to invert the scheme of information theory. The theory assumes a theoretical maximum of information with pure noise interference as the other extreme, and in between there's redundancy which reduces the information but also allows it to overcome the noise. But we should actually start with redundancy as the transmission and relaying of orders or instructions. Next, there's information, always the minimum needed for a satisfactory reception of orders. And then there's something like silence, or like stammering, or screaming, something slipping through underneath the redundancies and information, letting language slip through. So Deleuze is basically saying that noise is the thing that we need to communicate as humans and not get entangled in this strict mesh of information theory and receiving orders. So, how can we frame the relation of noise, order, and communication in the situation of a protest or riot? And what role can the in-between of noise, its metaphors, and their strategic use play in this? Noise is normally associated with disorder and violence, but it is not situated on the side of the police or the side of the protesters exclusively. As we have seen with the LRAD, the police can deploy noise as sonic violence, and it does this to achieve a maximum of intelligibility, the opposite of noise. While protesters and rioters supposedly use, from the perspective of the law, noise as annoyance and disruption, as means of communication or as science. It is not really feasible to argue with a law versus noise dichotomy like Labelle does, since the law or the police produce their own noise. Oh, God damn it. Okay, I have to wrap up. I can do this in 5 minutes and skip the last slide. So, strategic ambiguity of noise and noise in the law. A few years ago in the British Parliament, a new law was debated, the Police Crime and Sentencing Bill, that gave the police more power, basically. And there was a clause in this law that said that police are allowed to disperse any legal protest if they deem it to be too noisy and disruptive. But the law doesn't state what noise, what the level of noise should be. Like the police has carte blanche to use this law in whatever way they choose. And Minister of the Interior back then, Priti Patel, was pressed in a news broadcast on her definition of noise, and she sort of squirmed and wasn't able to define noise in this interview. So the newspapers went like, haha, Priti Patel is stupid, she cannot give a precise definition of noise, this law is a scam, la-di-da, and so on. But from my perspective, what she did was very, very smart, because she left it open. She used noise as ambiguity to create an ambiguity of what is deemed noisy and what is not, to have more wriggle room for her politics. So noise in the definition of information theory as ambiguity can be used by the law to bend the law. So noise as strategic ambiguity is also always a part of legal procedures, of lawmaking, and of policing. That was the main point I wanted to bring across. And I just read my closing statement, and then I'm finished. Martin Luther King once said, "A riot is the language of the unheard." So there's also always meaning in a riot. The sonic experience of noise can easily morph into an epistemic problem and a concrete experience of a conceptual. Our sonic perception might appear as an anthropological constant, but it is also organized around the historic fault lines, the history we are living and living in right now of economy and politics. Experiencing noise, if you listen closely, despite the racket, can open your ears to political struggle and to the, in the words of Douglas Kahn, constant grating sound generated by the movement between the abstract and the empirical, that is noise. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, David. Well, we're going to have the Q&A session after the next speaker, and I'm pretty sure you have a lot of questions that want to ask David, but thank you very much for the presentation. Next speaker we have with us now is the artist from Vietnam, and her name is Nguyen Trinh. Miss T will also participate in the Thailand Biennale by the end of this year, and she will be presenting in this venue in the topic of listening as art, in between sound, image, and space, a mycological moving image practice. I have some introduction I would like to give about Miss T. Just a moment. So Misty was born in Hanoi in 1973 and also based in Hanoi right now. She's a filmmaker, an artist, traversing boundaries between films, documentary, video art, installation, and performance. Her practice currently explores the potential of sound and listening and the multiple relations between the image, sound, and space, with ongoing interest in history, memory, ecology, representation, and the unknown. Recent exhibitions include installations at the Documenta 15 in Castle last year, the Minneapolis Institute of Art in Minnesota in 2019, the 9th Asia Pacific Triennial of Contemporary Art in Brisbane, Queensland in 2019, the 21st Biennial of Sydney in 2018, and the 13th Lyon Contemporary Art Biennial in 2015. So, Ms. T, it's our honor to have you here, and the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming and thank you for inviting me to this symposium. I was a little bit worried that I was the only speaker who's not really like a sound expert. I'm working more with moving image and film, but have a tendency of expanding my practice a little bit to incorporate different kind of media. So today I would try to present some works and to show kind of the influence and interest in sound and listening. Here's some key terms that kind of describe my general practice in moving image, film, and media arts. I won't go into details, but I mean the key terms can suggest my interest and the kind of form of work that I've been dealing with. So things like history, memory, landscape, ecology, documentary, essay film, diary, file footage, sound, performativity, chance, the unknown, and the in-betweenness. I try to go through this quickly. So I would show you a couple of video clips to give some example of my practice from more than 10 years ago that actually kind of started to give me some idea and kind of turn my attention a little bit from the image and the moving image to other elements like sound. How do I get to So like this is an installation I did in Hanoi from 2010.
tên là Nguyen, Nguyen là chữa bệnh dây dòng. Tôi là Linh, tôi vừa ăn xong một buổi tiệc trường.
Tôi tên là Dương, tôi mới ăn bánh giòn.
Tôi vừa ăn xong món chả cuốn.
Tôi là Nam, tôi vừa ăn xong món ngon. sang món thịt bò khô.
Yeah. So in this in video installation, I asked 19 artists in our artist community in Hanoi, including myself. And so each one would choose a piece of food, and I filmed them individually for the whole process of eating. Sometimes some people take a very long time to finish to eat a piece of food, so they would just do it, standing up, and then at the end they would say their name and said what they just ate. And I installed this in a big space, completely dark, and project each one life size on cardboard. Wooden cardboard, like exactly the shape of their body, and they stand very still, so it's not much movement. So it's so I can do the cutout very precisely. So in the space, they would appear as if they are standing there and eating the piece of food, and you can, as an audience, you can go inside within on the bodies and. The sound, I installed the sound of their eating different food. To begin with, it was just a part of the video, because that is the video and there is sound. But actually, I realized that this sound of the eating, it's very interesting in the space, and now I can even imagine that maybe even without the image, and you just get into the space and then you hear all this sound of noise of people eating different things, that could work as well. And for me, actually I did this work as a kind of a response to our situation in our community of art in Hanoi, that we face a lot of censorship. And at this time when I would be having the installation, we face the ban from authority that we're not allowed to gather and make exhibition. And this space is a kind of an underground art space that was going on for a long time, and so we had to close all the events and everything. So this kind of work, it's a response to that, but it's also a kind of a result of my research on the history of dissident art in Vietnam, like from the 50s. So I work with people who are like writers and poets and artists who still survive from that time. So all this thing is kind of respond to both a kind of historical and present contemporary kind of scene of artists and art practice in Vietnam. So anyway, the kind of discover of sound was kind of maybe like coincidence for me, but when I work on installation, that is kind of the beginning of my kind of discovering the power of sound. And can you hear me? Okay. This is an excerpt from another work called Landscape Series number 1. This is one of the works that I made from found footage. So I scanned and collected hundreds and hundreds of press photographs from the press, from online, with the idea of landscape as a quiet witness to history. We see an excerpt from this is a slide projection. So in this excerpt, I kind of put together the beginning and the end of the slideshow. But in the real slide projection, you would see kind of like somebody moving through many landscapes. And from the beginning, the landscape is very wide and large, and the person who appear in this landscape were very, very small. And then they kind of move closer and closer to something. And then at the end, they were pointing more to more specific things like the injured finger or the head, or at the very end, they were kind of pointing at you as the audience or pointing at me as an artist. And the sound that I discovered from this installation that I found really important, but you couldn't hear very well in when I show it. It's the sound of the slide projector. It's very it's kind of like move you forward, but also very kind of emphasizes repetition, and this is a loop, so it would go on forever, and this is the sound of the slide projector, which it's just never stop, and it's very regular, and it's just repeating all the time, and it's I find it very important to the work because of this gesture of pointing. I won't tell you why it is important, but for me, it's kind of like sometimes you just work on something and not with the intention that some elements would be important, but then you kind of discover during the process of making. So for me, the discovery of the power of sound and listening came gradually with my process of working on different kind of film and moving image projects, differently between working in film and or working with installation. The two projects that I just showed you, it was more installation. So the kind of role of sound was different in the relations to image. It was more kind of relating to space and also the body experience. But in the film I made was many of them would be called essay films. And in essay films, I find a different kind of relationship between the image and the sound or the soundtrack. I like a definition of essay film that I find relevant to the talk and to talk about sound and the relations with image. That is from André Bazin. He's a French critic, very important critic of cinema. And he's one of the first one who defined what is essay film. And he said that the relationship in an essay film, and an essay film is the editing. It's not horizontal, but it's vertical. So in a normal film, like a fiction film or documentary film, you have a relationship, from one sequence to the next. So the editing is horizontal. You kind of moving the logic and how the film progress is it's like one sequence to another. But the editing of or the relationship in essay films is a vertical one. It's vertical. It means that the meaning and the relationship in the shot, in the sequence, in what you see in an essay film is not from one sequence to the next, but in between what you see and what you hear. And actually he said the relationship is between the eye and the ear, not from one sequence to another. And I make a lot of essay films, so I totally interested in this kind of relationship. And normally in my film, when I build the image and the sound or the voice, I always try to make it some way that is not regular. It's not like one thing is illustrating the other. It's not like the voice or the language or the sound, they are there to illustrate for the image, but they kind of function and they have their own logic. And actually, like, the audience have to be very active in processing this relationship. And actually, you kind of have to question a lot of the time too, because sometimes the relationship is the contrast. And you question, is this true? Like the image, do you believe in the image or do you believe in the sound? And at once, I want for the audience to have all of your senses, your eyes and your ears and your brain have to be active and try to kind of work out this relationship and what is the gap here between what you see and what you hear. And I find that very generative. So now I'm showing you two of more recent projects that I work with sound and listening kind of in a more intentional way. this one is a film called How to Improve the World. Your earliest memory are the sound or the image?
image
âm thanh thích âm thanh nữa.
It's a kind of thriller, so it's hard to imagine, but you can see that it's kind of dealing with different perceptions of the world. I think we in many parts of the world where maybe we used to have a different kind of culture and different way of perception, but now with the modernized and or globalized or westernized kind of progress, I think we are losing kind of a diverse ways of perceiving the world. So for example, this is the group of indigenous, many indigenous people in Vietnam, and in this particular area in Central Highlands. They have a very different way of perception, and like they have a listening culture, and the way that they use their ears is very, very important in their culture. And actually they still kind of, although now it's changing a lot and they're losing their way, but memory, it's very much attached to the ear. And they remember many things. And the oral culture was still there, but of course changing very fast. And so I won't talk more about that, but I mean, from working with in different projects with indigenous people, I think I'm very curious and interested in their way of perceiving, and got influence from them. And one of the parts of the things that I'm also interested in their culture is their music and the way they play music as well. So in later projects, I started to incorporate their musical instruments into the work. This one is a project that I did for the last documenta, where I used the musical instruments and the wind sensors to automate the system. And the role of listening in this work, it's very important. So in that work, it's actually the background for that work. It's a bit complicated because I was like really linking a lot of elements. But in the work itself, it looks very simple. You only see the shadows of like a forest in a dark space, and you hear the sound of the flute that I hang in a kind of 360 degrees on the roof. And you don't really see like technology or lights. I imagine it more like a theater, then the audience only see kind of the image and the sound, but you don't really see like musicians and the people kind of behind the scene. But I built this scene from a scene from a novel. It's an autobiographical novel of one of the writers, of the dissident writer that I work with. So he was imprisoned in the late 60s to 70s, and he lived in the forest, in the prison there. It used to be very common in Vietnam, in northern Vietnam, that there would be many people who would be put in the prison, and they would have to do forced labor. Usually maybe in like mountain and forest areas. It's a practice that was quite common in communist and socialist countries like China or Russia. Like Russia, you read about the Gulag and detention, labor, forced labor camps and things like that. So I learned about that, and he wrote this novel many years after he was out of prison, and he wrote about his experience being in the prison and in the forest. And when I reread his novel, I was actually very struck by the way he spent a lot of time describing the many plants and trees and the kind of ecosystem in the forest. And it's kind of, I became very interested in forest and in ecology. So I found it very interesting that this kind of overlapping of political and ecological history. And I use a particular scene in the novel where he described a chili forest that one time the prisoners, when they walked in the forest, they came across. And as the people from Southeast Asia, we love chili, right? And the prisoners, they really miss all kind of herbs and especially the chili, because they don't have it in the prison. And of course they have very bad food and hungry all the time. But like the chili is something that they always like really crave. They miss it. And for them, the chili taste is like the sense of home. And actually the writer, he compared the chili with freedom. Actually, he has many definitions of freedom in his novel, but one of it is chili. So you can imagine how excited the prisoners would become, like if they come across a whole forest of ancient chili plants. So they became really crazy, and nobody could stop them from, trying to harvest and, put all the chilies in every pockets that they have. And, so like the security guards, and nobody could stop them, and they became so crazy. And then at the end, they had to, the guards, they had to shoot first to threaten, to scare the prisoners, but still couldn't scare them. They couldn't stop, and so finally they really shot, and the one prisoner who died, he was a ethnic minority person from the north, and so he died when his hands were full of chili. So I wanted to use that scene and build this kind of, not really as a narrative, but just something that kind of give me the kind of maybe departure or inspiration. So I try to plant a lot of chili plants, and I'm not very good with planting things. So actually I make a lot of them die. But all the chili plants, they are so small. They are very, very small. And I was imagining that I would do kind of a puppet theater, projection of very small trees, plants, and make it into like a very large dark forest. And the sound is the flute that I was researching to see what kind of musical instruments that the ethnic minority people from the north, they would use, because the prisoner who died, he is from one of the group in the north. And so I found the kind of flute that they use. And I also had the inspiration from my previous project when I worked with the people in Central Highlands. And I really love the way they play music together. They always play as a group. So usually for their instruments, each one play only one note. Not like, like the modern instrument where you as a single musician, you can play everything and you can control every note. But they play only one note. And it's the same like the way they play gongs. They would have a very big group of players and each one only play one note. But the beautiful thing is that that way they always have to listen to each other and to improvise and make the music together. So for you can see the flutes that I hang from the ceiling. So each one produce one note. Actually, they can raise to 3 levels. Like when you pump more air, I use an air compressor. So you can pump more air into each one, and each time, if you double the amount of air pressure, it would raise by 1 octave. And I use the pentatonic scale, which is the scale of like traditional instruments, like in Asia or in Vietnam, or among these ethnic groups, they would use this kind of scale, not like the Western scale with more notes. And then I use the technology and coding to build the system to control all this, air compression. And I came back to the site where the prison used to be. Actually, now there's still a prison there, and now it's the whole forest thing that kind of face a different kind of environmental crisis. That now with like deforestation and privatization of land and forest. So that's another problem. And so we install the wind sensors there. So we get the real-time data for the direction and the velocity of the wind. And this data would be sent from this forest in Vietnam to Documenta. And so there it would go in through the system of air compressor and other controller to tell which flute to play and how high it would play. So I mean, for that work for me, actually, the sound it's very crucial. Although I have the light and the shadow there as well. By the way, the light also was controlled by the data of the wind as well. So the kind of the light and the sound kind of go in sync. So for this work, for me, it's about listening, about paying attention, about letting the invisible, non-human forces and the unknown take the center stage. It's about the interconnectedness between human and non-human worlds, between different histories and memories, the political and the ecological. This is a kind of maybe a bit kind of a broader theme for me. One of the areas that I was thinking of in kind of moving towards more sound and space is my interest in the peripheral vision. I think that in a way the peripheral vision also function a little bit more like sound. That you know, with the vision, you are looking at things in front of you, and you look at the details, and it's a very kind of one-directional. And what I love about sound is that it's very environmental. It's all around you, and it gives you the shape of the space and the environment. Anyway, so maybe I read a quote from a book that I like by Juliani Palasma. It's not new. It's called The Eyes of the Skin, Architecture and the Senses. And in this book, he was offer his criticism against the hegemony of the vision in modern architecture over all other sensory stimuli available to a human perception, or what he called ocular centrism. I think this is very important for artists, for us who deal primarily with the image. So a quote from the book, he said, peripheral vision integrates us with space, while focused vision pushes us out of the space, making us mere spectators. The defensive and unfocused gaze of our time, burdened by sensory overload, may eventually open up new realms of vision and thought, freed of the implicit desire of the eye for control and power. The loss of focus can liberate the eye from its historical patriarchal domination. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nguyen, Miss Nguyen Tin Tri. I'm sorry. Well, it's 11:55, and we're gonna have a small session for question and answer, and then we will leave for lunch, and you can come back at 1:30 for the afternoon session. I'm just gonna thank you very much for the if I would like to invite all the 4 speakers in the morning session, just to wrap things up, and maybe if the audience have any question, please feel free to ask. Otherwise, I have to ask again, but it would be great if I have questions from the audience. Is that mine? No, it's not mine. Okay. Please come up the stage, please. Thank you. We're gonna have the pink poster on our face as a screen tone. So, any question from the audience? I just gonna sum up a bit about what we did this morning. Dayang came up with the introduction of the Biennale, and then Yeung present the experience of, I think it's poetic in terms of how to listen to the sound of the written words. And then David came on the stage and he presented the noise, the expectation of noise and the connection with the politics as well. And Kunti, am I pronouncing right? T. Kunti presenting the work that deal with image and also sounds between images, and it touched upon I think it talks about the relationship between people, communities, and maybe subcultures and so on. So any question from the audience that maybe would like to ask any of the speakers in the morning session? มีไหมครับมีคำถามจากข้างล่างไหมครับอาจจะ2 หรือ 3 คำถาม
So we would have maybe 2 or 3 questions. If you would rather write the questions, you can write them down as well and then send it to the staff, and then we'll ask the question for you.
Anything you want to add in your presentation that you might missed, or something you want to?
Maybe I can start while the microphone is with me. Okay, so although the Listening Biennial says that the program is from July 6th to August 8th this year, no? As neighbors, as a community here in the region of Southeast Asia, I would like to, as early as now, extend invitation for us to continue what we have started here, like conversation post-COVID lockdowns in like what we did in Tambayan, what we're doing here right now in Symposium, because it seems that there are a lot of things we haven't like started cultivating yet, and this could like grow into an even bigger community than what we have right now, right? Whether it's an institutional effort or among us as friends, as family. So yeah, I would like to start with that this is not the end, but this could be a beginning of a bigger community, a bigger connection for all of us.
Yeah, please, the question. คุณอาจารย์ภูมิพัก อาจารย์ภูมิพัก please.
Thank you so much. First I would like to thank all of you for coming all the way here. Some might have traveled really far, some might have just traveled for a few hours, and I think it's a really great opportunity to have very diverse artists presenting in the same room. And I have a small question for David, because you talked about noise and everything. I believe that there might be some reasons behind the change of paradigm when, let's say, composers started composing with more dissonance and everything in the past, and it seems like in the last few decades people turned towards noise. I would like to hear from you what you think about, like, what you think that could be the drive of this movement or this trend.
Okay, so if we take the 1980s as starting point of noise music, and we've had in Europe like avant-garde movements dealing with noise since about World War I, or shortly before World War I, when the Italian futurists developed their noise-making machines, and after the Second World War, all the endeavors in musique concrète and electronic music, but that was very much academic and ivory tower, and it took a couple of decades for these techniques and especially technology to sort of trickle down to a more street or subculture level, and especially it took a couple of decades for technology to become affordable and democratize the playing field. Like in the 1980s, it was possible to have a little cassette home studio, and you could afford a synthesizer that was as expensive as buying a guitar and not as expensive as buying a house as it was in the 1960s. So avant-garde music and all the noisiness it brings with it was accessible to everyone by that point. And I think that is one of the important factors regarding your question. Of course, there's more, but that would take a seminar to figure out.
So accessibility would be the technology that get accessed. Well, continuing from that, I mean, one of the questions I had in mind is about AI. It's about the, maybe we move on to more like now AI technology and this digital phenomenon. Does it affect the noise? Because you're playing like something against it, something, I don't know, what do you think?
It's not, oh God, affecting stuff maybe in the way that I see more noise compilations appearing with bad AI artwork done by Midjourney or with Midjourney, but I say bad because it's not my taste, but at the same time it's also maybe a form of democratization of means of production, but that's counting out how machine learning functions and that all this sometimes copyrighted data gets fed into these algorithms. But again, that's a conversation.
Take another seminar.
Yeah. I listened to an AI composed song, and it's not exactly noise, but it's hard to listen to because it's so incredibly bland and wrong in the wrong ways. Like listening to a hand with 6 fingers playing something badly. So technology is definitely not yet there, and for AI to really produce noise, somebody would have to come up with the idea to train an AI on noise and with noise, and to my knowledge, nobody came up with that so far.
Any other question? มีคำถามเพิ่มเติมไหมครับจากคุณผู้ชมครับมีไหมครับ Please ครับอาจารย์เตยงามครับ
First of all, I would like to thank everyone for coming to Thailand, and especially Dayang who start this project. Thank you so much. I'm sorry that I'm late today, so I have a questions for David. You mentioned about protests, right? Noise and protests. For my knowledge, I never ever learned about this information before, that noise connect to protest. Yeah, I would like to share that in Thailand, like some years ago, we have many protests in Thailand, and one of the protests, I can't remember the name, the protester, people who come to the protest, blow the whistle, beep, beep, all the times. There is one problem which is quite interesting. A homeless guy, a homeless people he's a man and he slept on the floor and he lived in the area that the protest took place. He couldn't sleep. The protest lasts for many months and he become crazy. It's drive him crazy because of the beep, 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 beep all the time, all day, all night. So he couldn't stand anymore. He decided to get a knife and then stab the protester. One of them died. So your lecture really remind me of that case. When this case go to the court, the man, the homeless guy, was decided guilty, and then he was put into jail. So like when I listen to your lecture, so I'm start thinking kind of like it is not totally his fault. It's the fault of the protester as well. So I would like like you to give some comment about this, about noise and protester.
Wow, that's
quite tragic, but
that's a tragic case that you bring up there, and it's also I'm trying to wrap my head around it and sort of trying to connect it with the logic I established in my talk. Of course, a protest is noisy and thereby annoying and being, and especially when you are like the person who has no means to escape or to protect yourself against stressful noise, and as a homeless person being yourself in a situation that is totally protest worthy, because nobody should have to live on the street in any society. It's a bit beyond words for me at this moment, and what I didn't talk about that much is silence. I touched upon it, but like there can be no total silence, but having quietude, to use a different word, is equally important as having shelter, having food. It's basically like should be a human right to
get silence.
Yeah, to have quiet time, daily, nightly, whatever. And I don't have like a real answer to what you brought up, but this is like my response. Thanks for sharing that and reminding me how complex these situations can be.
Maybe Yeung have something to add to it.
Yeah, thank you for your sharing. I was thinking maybe the example, I don't have anything specific to say about it, but maybe it's an illustration of what you were trying to, the dichotomy between noise and law that you were trying to dismantle, because you said it doesn't work as a dichotomy. So in this situation, we are looking at, I'm thinking, I go back a little bit. I'm thinking of Hannah Arendt's way of talking about violence. So she distinguishes between force, violence, power, and authority. So, and she elaborates on how violence is a means, and power comes about when we act in concert. So it's not from a person alone, and force is from a person alone. One could think of the moral source of one's force or strength, let's say. Moral strength. So my point is, it seems to me it is actually a case that shows, in this case, I'm not sure, I don't know anything about Thai authorities, but I can see maybe we could find examples from the world where the law is on the side of authority, which imposes on the people, and so and that it has its own way of commanding, which is, as you said, David, it's a kind of reductive kind of gesture. It's meant to be that way. If it's not reductive, it wouldn't work. So I'm thinking in terms of structural violence, which is, I think, what makes us sad and feel a sense of injustice in the case, because it seems you are suggesting that it is structural violence what causes homelessness in the first place, and then what causes the protesters to be on the street in response to that structural violence that became then of an affliction for someone who is deprived. So I guess I'm asking myself then, the next question would be, what is the resolution for that kind of structural violence on either a personal level or a collective level? So just to relate to what I have said and also what T has been saying has been really moving for me, two things. The legend that I was trying to make up is maybe one way of me trying to distance myself from that kind of violence that can be obviously identified by whoever has the last word on violence. And I want to resist that because without going into the morality, debates about violence and what it is as a means and end and I think one of the things that we have to maybe uphold is we should keep it as an open question, that it should be debatable, and it should not be where one power in capital P says, this I call riot and this I call other things. And T's work, So I Die a Natural Death, right? And They Die a Natural Death. It's such a moving title, and I thought the installation images you showed us, it reminds me a lot of breathing. And this is something I have been thinking about a lot, different kinds of breathing. So there's a queer theorist called Susan Stryker, do you know? She had started to talk about breathing, and she had been quoting from other people, but she says every breath is a revolution. She's talking about the queer population in the US where, every day is a fight. That's one thing. The other thing is she quotes Fanon, who, of course, gives us a lot of food for thought on colonialism. And he had talked about combative breathing. Not for soldiers per se, but just sometimes if we think of how suddenly we find it hard to breathe and that we have to gasp for air, we might share that kind of experience. And I'm thinking in terms of how there are all these different kinds of breathing as resistance, but also breathing as such a natural way of being, and we can't do without it. But then we can't be too conscious about it either, because in, I guess, religious breathing, sorry, I'm rambling, I'll wrap up. In religious kinds of breathing, like in the Sufi tradition and Buddhist tradition and all that, some teach controlled breathing, retention, others teach other ways, or integration. And some teach that if we are too conscious about it, it actually destroys the natural rhythm. So maybe it is this sort of back and forth movement that we are constantly in as human beings, and that may be a way that we could connect with difficult, challenging emotions and situations, and maybe then find a way out.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Thank you very much for sharing. Any other question? มีคำถามเพิ่มเติมไหมครับ? Maybe one last one. Maybe one last question before we take a break. Okay. So Thank you very much, and please give applause to the speakers in the morning session. I'm just going to quickly speak about the afternoon session. คืออย่างนี้นะครับท่านผู้มีเกียรติทุกท่านคือช่วงบ่ายนะครับเรามี talk อีก3 talk.
So in the afternoon we actually have another 3 talks and they are artists, musicians and art researchers from Thailand.
ท่านสักครู่นะครับคือจริงๆแล้วตอนช่วงเช้าอาจจะเป็นบางอย่างที่เรามองภาพกว้างนะครับ In the morning I think we saw this listening biennale from the very international approach in a very diverse communities, and in the afternoon we will focus it in the relationship with the Thai practitioners. So จะมีนะครับช่วงบ่ายโมงครึ่งนะครับเรากลับมาพบกันเวลาบ่ายโมงครึ่งโดยอาจารย์ดร.เตยงามคุปตบุตรนะครับจากภาควิชาสื่อผสมคณะจิตรกรรมประติมากรรมและภาพพิมพ์นะครับ Listening as art, science, sound as media and content, a case study of Darling we are with you. I think it's your work มันน่าจะเป็นส่วนหนึ่งของงานของอาจารย์นะครับแล้วก็ประชาสัมพันธ์นะครับขณะนี้อาจารย์เตยงามแสดงงานทุนศิลป์พิรศรีอยู่ที่หอศิลป์มหาลัยศิลปากรนะครับในช่วงเที่ยงถ้าท่านผู้มีเกียรติมีโอกาสอยากเชิญไป she is having an exhibition here right now in the art gallery at the art center หลังจากนั้นนะครับทอล์กที่2นะครับจะเป็นโดยท่านอาจารย์ภูมิพักนะครับจรุปกรณ์นะครับแล้วก็คุณอาจารย์กุลิศบุญยาสอนนะครับซึ่งอาจารย์กุลิศจะเดินทางมาด้วยแล้วก็เป็นอาจารย์จากราชภัฏอยุธยาใช่ไหมครับท่านอาจารย์ยังสอนอยู่ที่ราชภัฏอยุธยานะครับแล้วก็หัวข้อคือ listening as a political act นะครับ sonic resistance to authority. So I think it's going to have many things in response to David's talk in the morning session. It's going to be very interesting to hear. คืออันนี้จะเป็นช่วงบ่าย2นะครับเราจะมีเบรกแล้วก็จะเป็นทอล์กสุดท้ายนะครับโดยอาจารย์สรยุทธเอี่ยมยิ่งยุทธเอี่ยมเอื้อยุทธนะครับกับอาจารย์สรัญรัตน์นะครับแสงชัยนะครับอาจารย์สรยุทธจากมหาวิทยาลัยเชียงใหม่นะครับคณะวิทยาศิลป์มหาวิทยาลัยเชียงใหม่ท่านจะซูมเข้ามาส่วนอาจารย์สรัญรัตน์นะครับจากคณะดุริยางคศาสตร์นะครับหัวข้อคือ listening as connection memory soundtracks of our lives คือทั้ง3ทอล์กน่าสนใจมากนะครับไม่อยากให้ทุกท่านพลาดแล้วก็ใช้เวลาประมาณทอล์กแล้วประมาณ 30-40 นาทีเท่านั้นเองนะครับก็อยากให้ทุกท่านกลับมาไม่อยากให้ไปไหนนะครับขอพักเที่ยงแค่ชั่วโมงเดียวบ่ายโมงครึ่งมาพบกันนะครับขอบคุณมากนะครับสำหรับตอนเช้านะครับแล้วก็พบกันเวลาบ่ายโมงครึ่งครับขอบพระคุณมากครับ
So thank you once again. See you at 1 p.m.